I was fired by the CEO's son just 48 hours before my $92,000 bonus was due. Fired without warning. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. My name is Natalie Henson, and for 7 years I gave everything I had to a logistics company in Chicago. I was 34, and my life revolved around that job. I worked late nights, came in on weekends, and gave up vacations just to prove myself. The thought of the upcoming $92,000 bonus was the only thing keeping me going. It wasn't just money. It meant paying off debts, finally being able to breathe, and most of all, covering my mom's medical treatments. She had been sick for months, and I was the only one she could rely on. That bonus was our lifeline. Just 2 days before payout, I was called into a meeting I didn't even know was scheduled. The moment I walked in and saw Ethan Corbin sitting at the table, I felt my stomach sink. Ethan was the CEO's son, a spoiled man who had only been in the company for a few months. Everyone whispered about how he hated me because I didn't bend to his arrogance. I treated him like any other coworker, not like royalty, and apparently that bruised his ego. He looked at me with a smug smile and started reading from a paper like he had been rehearsing it all day. Natalie, your performance has been under review. After several discrepancies in your reports, we've decided to let you go effective immediately. His words hit like a punch to the gut. My hands went cold. I had never had a bad review in my career. In fact, I was the one other managers called when things fell apart. I could barely get words out, but I managed to ask, "What discrepancies? Show me where." He didn't bother. He just leaned back, smirking like he had won some kind of game. The HR rep in the room, Derek, couldn't even meet my eyes. I could see the guilt written all over his face, but he said nothing. My body moved on autopilot as they handed me papers and told me to collect my things. I walked out of that building with people staring, whispering. The humiliation burned deeper than the betrayal. On the train home, I tried to stay strong, but when I told my mother what had happened, I broke. She sat in her chair with tears in her eyes, apologizing even though it wasn't her fault. She kept saying, "We'll find a way," but we both knew what that bonus meant. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Ethan's smirk, his casual cruelty, the way he tossed aside my years of sacrifice like I was nothing. I knew one thing for sure. Ethan thought he had destroyed me. He thought firing me before my bonus would end my fight. But he had no idea who he was messing with. This wasn't the end. This was just the start. I had a few days to sit in the silence of my apartment and think about everything I had given up for that company. I remembered the birthdays I missed, the friends I lost touch with, the times I turned down family trips because work needed me. I told myself all those years that it would pay off one day, that the company would value my dedication. Now, sitting on my couch with nothing but the sound of the clock ticking, I realized how wrong I had been. When I finally checked my phone, I had a message from Samantha, my closest coworker. She asked me to meet her for coffee. I almost didn't go, but something in me needed to hear her voice. At the cafe, she leaned across the table and whispered, "Ethan has been planning this. He said more than once that you needed to go. He wanted the spotlight for himself." Her words made my stomach twist, but deep down I wasn't surprised. Ethan had always been uncomfortable around me, like my experience was some kind of threat to his position. Later that night, Derek called. He worked in HR, and I could tell he had struggled to keep quiet in that meeting. His voice was heavy when he said, "Natalie, I need you to know something. Those mistakes in your reports? They weren't real. Ethan asked us to flag them. He wanted a reason to push you out before the payout." I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles hurt. Derek lowered his voice and added, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but you deserve to know." Hearing the truth gave me a strange mix of pain and clarity. It wasn't about my work, it never had been. It was about Ethan wanting control, wanting to prove something to his father, Richard Corbin. I thought about every late night I had spent fixing problems. All the times I carried projects when Ethan had no clue what he was doing. He couldn't stand that I had earned respect the hard way. I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I asked for a meeting with Richard. I walked into his office, nervous but determined, and told him what had happened. I explained how hard I had worked, how false the accusations were, how much this had cost me. Richard listened, his face stiff, but when I was done, he simply folded his hands and said, "Natalie, I trust my son's judgment. If he felt this was necessary, then that's the decision we're standing by." The coldness in his tone stunned me. He didn't even want to see the proof I brought. I left that office shaking, realizing there would be no fairness here. Ethan had the protection of his father, and nothing I said would change that. For the first time, it sank in fully. The company I had given everything to had chosen arrogance over loyalty. As I walked out of that building, a quiet fire lit inside me. If they thought they could break me and leave me with nothing, they were wrong. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. 2 security guards walked beside me as I carried a small box of my belongings through the office. People I had worked with for years kept their eyes glued to their screens, pretending not to notice. A few risked a glance, but no one said a word. My cheeks burned as I passed desks where I had once stood proudly giving instructions, solving problems, keeping everything running. Now I was being treated like someone dangerous, walked out of the same doors I had walked through every morning with purpose. The cool air outside hit my face, but it didn't ease the sting. The truth sank in with every step toward the train station. The bonus I had worked toward for so long was gone. There would be no check, no relief, no way to pay off the bills stacked on my counter at home. My throat tightened when I thought of the treatments my mother needed. We had circled the date on the calendar, counting down the days until the money arrived. It was supposed to mean safety, hope, a chance for her to get better. Now it was all ripped away. When I reached home, my mother was waiting by the window like she always did when I came back late. I tried to force a smile, but she knew something was wrong before I even opened my mouth. I sat across from her and explained everything in as steady a voice as I could manage. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. "Natalie, what are we going to do?" she whispered. I wanted to give her comfort, but the truth was I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us staring at the floor, neither wanting to say what we feared most. She reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "We'll figure something out," she said, though her voice trembled. I nodded, but the words didn't settle the storm inside me. I felt robbed, stripped of everything I had earned, humiliated in front of people who once looked up to me. The weight of it pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. That night, when she had gone to bed, I stayed awake at the kitchen table with the lights off. The city outside was alive, but my world felt frozen. I replayed Ethan's smug expression in my head, the way he dismissed me like I was nothing. He thought he had crushed me for good. He believed he had taken not just my job, but my future. But as I sat there in the dark, anger slowly burned through the despair. For the first time since that meeting, I felt a sharp clarity. Ethan might have the power of his father behind him, but he didn't have the truth on his side. He didn't know how strong I could be when everything was on the line. I whispered to myself, steady and certain, "This isn't finished." It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about dignity, justice, and proving that he had chosen the wrong person to betray. After the shock wore off, I remembered that I had once mirrored my work laptop to my personal drive. At first, I only thought about saving old projects and contacts that might help me in the future. I didn't expect to find anything unusual. Still, late one night, I opened the folder and began scrolling through files, looking for anything useful. My eyes moved quickly, but then something caught my attention. It wasn't a report or a presentation. It was a thread of emails. The sender's name made my heart race. It was Ethan. I opened the first one carefully. The words felt like poison spilling across the screen. He was corresponding with a vendor I remembered, one we had struggled with because of delays and missing shipments. The messages weren't about fixing problems or improving service. They were about money being moved quietly, favors being promised, deals being made off the record. Ethan's words were cocky, careless. He bragged about the extra cash he was pocketing and mocked anyone who might notice. I read further, and my chest tightened. In one email, he wrote plainly that he had taken care of the bonus issue. He told the vendor that I had been fired before payout, laughing about how he saved money for the company by cutting me out. It wasn't just cruelty. It was proof that everything had been planned long before I sat in that meeting. My firing wasn't about mistakes. It was about greed and ego. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen. For the first time in days, the heaviness on my chest began to lift. My humiliation hadn't been the end of my story. It was a setup, and now I had evidence. Ethan thought he was untouchable, but his arrogance had made him sloppy. He left a trail, and I had it right in front of me. I kept digging, opening file after file, screenshotting every email, organizing them into folders. Each click revealed something worse. Payments routed through shell accounts, promises of vacations and gifts, even messages where Ethan insulted board members and mocked his father's leadership. He wasn't just careless, he was reckless. As I worked, my anger shifted into something sharper. I no longer felt like the powerless employee walked out under guard. I felt like someone holding a weapon, one Ethan didn't know existed. For the first time since I lost my job, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I could do with what I had just uncovered. By the time the sun came up, my desk was covered with printed copies and notes. I leaned back, exhausted but strangely alive. The fear that had been eating me was gone, replaced with determination. Ethan had taken my job, my income, and my peace of mind, but in his arrogance, he had handed me something stronger. I didn't just have proof of what he did to me. I had enough to expose everything he had been hiding. This wasn't only about getting even. It was bigger. I realized that if I acted carefully, I could do more than clear my name. I could bring him down. I knew I couldn't rush into anything. The Corbins had money, power, and a wall of lawyers ready to bury anyone who dared to stand against them. If I made one wrong move, everything I had discovered could be turned against me. I needed someone I could trust, someone who had already seen the truth, but didn't have the courage to speak up before. That's when I thought of Derek. I called him late in the evening, careful to keep my voice steady. He answered quickly, almost like he had been expecting me. At first, I hesitated, unsure how much I should reveal. But after a pause, I told him I had evidence, and the line went quiet. Then Derek said softly, "Meet me, but don't bring anything with you yet. We'll talk." We sat in his car in an empty parking lot, both of us looking around like we were doing something illegal. I explained what I had found, and his face grew pale. He admitted he always suspected Ethan was dirty, but he never had proof. He warned me about trying to fight legally. "They'll drown you in paperwork," he said. "They'll twist everything until you're the one on trial." His words weren't meant to scare me, just to remind me who I was up against. I nodded, already knowing he was right. A lawsuit wasn't the way. Ethan had to be exposed from the inside, in a way that even his father couldn't protect him. It had to be undeniable. Something that would not just reveal his lies, but also destroy his standing with the people who gave him power. So I began to work carefully, almost like building a puzzle. Every email, every document, every message was placed into a folder labeled and dated. I made copies, then copies of the copies, stored them in different places so nothing could disappear if someone tried to silence me. I kept track of every reckless word Ethan had written, every payment that didn't add up, every promise he made to his shady partners. But I didn't stop there. I also gathered small details. The complaints from staff about his behavior, his late arrivals, his careless decisions that nearly cost clients. It wasn't just about catching him in fraud. It was about showing the full picture of a man who was never fit to lead. Late nights at my kitchen table turned into weeks of quiet preparation. My mother noticed the papers piling up, the determined look in my eyes, but she didn't ask. She simply brought me coffee and touched my shoulder as if to say, "Keep going." The more I built, the stronger I felt. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was preparing a weapon Ethan couldn't see coming. This wasn't about court battles or begging the Corbins for fairness. This was about making sure, when the time came, Ethan's own arrogance would tear him down. I promised myself that when I revealed everything, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would end his. The day of the board meeting arrived, and I knew it was my moment. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to look steady and unshaken. I walked into the building like I still belonged there, holding a slim folder that carried the weight of weeks of work. The receptionist froze when she saw me, but before anyone could stop me, I pushed open the doors of the conference room. Every head turned. Around the long table sat executives, managers, and at the head, Richard Corbin himself. Right beside him lounged Ethan, tapping on his phone with that same smugness I could never forget. When his eyes met mine, he laughed under his breath. "What are you doing here?" he asked loudly, making sure everyone heard. Security must have gotten sloppy. For a moment, the room buzzed with whispers, but I didn't let myself waver. I walked to the front and placed my folder on the table. "You all deserve to know what's really been happening," I said, my voice calm but firm. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking as though I was nothing more than a nuisance. I opened the folder and spread out copies of the emails, payment records, and correspondence I had uncovered. I spoke clearly, explaining how funds had been rerouted, how company contracts had been compromised, and how Ethan had personally profited from shady deals. With every page I turned, I could see the expressions around the table shift from confusion to disbelief. Gasps broke the silence when I read aloud one of Ethan's own messages bragging about cutting me out before the bonus payout. Several board members exchanged stunned looks. One woman covered her mouth, while another leaned forward to grab a copy of the documents from the table. The weight of truth was settling into the room, and Ethan's smirk began to falter. He tried to laugh it off, waving a hand dismissively. "These are fake. She's bitter because she got fired. Don't waste your time with this nonsense." His tone was casual, but I noticed his knuckles tightening around the armrest of his chair. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid down another sheet, one showing payment trails linked directly to him, and then another proving meetings with vendors that weren't recorded in official files. The pile of evidence grew heavier by the second, and the murmurs around the table turned into a low roar of disbelief. Richard's face hardened as he looked from me to his son. The silence that followed was thicker than anything I had ever felt. I had done what I came to do, brought the truth into the light, right where Ethan thought he was safest. I gathered the remaining papers, stood tall, and looked Ethan directly in the eye. His grin was gone now, replaced with a flicker of panic he couldn't hide. Without another word, I walked toward the door, leaving the shock and whispers behind me. The evidence was out, and there was no taking it back. The room was tense after I laid the first round of evidence, but Ethan quickly leaned forward, trying to take control again. His voice was sharp as he said, "None of this proves anything. Anyone could have made those documents. She's desperate, and you're all falling for it." He looked around the table, searching for support, but the confidence he usually carried was slipping. I stayed calm. Without saying much, I reached into my folder again and placed another stack of papers on the table. These weren't just summaries. They were direct receipts, payment confirmations, and entire email threads with his name on them. The more I laid down, the harder it became for him to speak over me. Board members leaned in closer, their eyes scanning every line. The silence between his protests stretched longer each time. A man from the far end of the table finally spoke. "Ethan, these are your accounts. These transfers came straight from company funds." Another director added, "Why would an ex-employee have access to such detailed records if they weren't real?" Their questions cut through the air like blades. Ethan's face turned red, and he stammered, trying to brush it off as a misunderstanding, but no one looked convinced anymore. Richard sat stiffly, his hands clasped in front of him. He had not spoken since I walked in, but his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. For years he had defended his son, covered his shortcomings, and pushed aside complaints. Now, with each page being passed around, it was harder for him to shield Ethan from the truth. A woman near him whispered, "This is serious negligence, Richard." How could you not have seen this? The words made his jaw tighten. Ethan tried again to regain ground. She's twisting everything. Dad, you know me. You know I wouldn't risk the company like this. But when I slid forward the final chain of emails, ones where he openly mocked the leadership team and bragged about making money under the table, the room went quiet again. His denial lost all weight the moment his own words stared back at them. The board members no longer looked at me. They were all focused on him now, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and anger. One leaned back and said, "If this is accurate, it's not just unethical. It's criminal." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. He was cornered. Richard finally broke his silence, asking in a low, shaken voice, "Ethan, tell me this isn't true." But the lack of any defense was answer enough. The once proud CEO looked smaller, his faith in his son crumbling in front of everyone. I didn't need to stay any longer. I had delivered what needed to be said and shown. Without another word, I gathered my folder, turned toward the door, and walked out. Behind me, the voices rose, arguments breaking out, Ethan's desperate protests growing louder. But I didn't look back. I knew the damage was done, and nothing could protect him from what was coming. Word of the meeting spread through the company faster than I expected. By the next morning, employees were whispering in hallways and exchanging looks over coffee. The story of Ethan being exposed was already making its way through every department. What had once been his arrogant strut around the office was replaced by silence. Ethan didn't show his face again. He had been pulled from his position while an internal review began. For someone who always acted untouchable, the fall hit him hard. I heard from Samantha that his confidence had cracked. Instead of mocking people in meetings, he was now pacing around behind closed doors, snapping at assistants and begging his father to fix everything. The charm he wore like armor had vanished. He wasn't in control anymore, and everyone could see it. A few days later, I received a call from Richard himself. His voice was calm, but there was strain beneath it. He asked if we could meet privately. Out of curiosity, I agreed. We sat across from each other in a quiet corner of a downtown restaurant. He wasted no time. "Natalie, this doesn't have to go public. I know you've been wronged, and I want to make this right. Let me compensate you for the trouble." The words should have sounded like an apology, but they didn't. They sounded like someone trying to bury a mess before it grew too large. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "This isn't about a check. Your son used his position to ruin me, and he did worse than that to this company. Do you really think paying me off will erase that?" Richard's face tightened. For a man used to getting his way, my refusal caught him off guard. He leaned back, clearly unsettled. I could tell he wanted the scandal contained. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about shareholders, clients, and the press. But I had no interest in being part of his cover-up. Meanwhile, back at the company, the atmosphere had shifted. People who once kept their heads down were speaking more freely. They wondered what leadership would look like without Ethan, and some even whispered that I might come back. The idea seemed impossible a week earlier, but now it didn't sound so far-fetched. I didn't entertain the thought out loud, though. I wasn't after a position or a paycheck. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. Ethan had used me as a stepping stone, thinking he could push me out quietly, but now his own actions were on trial. As the investigation continued, Ethan's name grew darker in the company's corridors. Employees avoided mentioning him unless it was to joke about his sudden vacation. His downfall was becoming a lesson whispered among staff. Arrogance only lasts until the truth catches up. For me, the satisfaction wasn't in hearing the rumors or seeing him unravel. It was in knowing I hadn't let him silence me. The story was no longer his to control. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight beginning to lift. The investigation dragged on for weeks, but the outcome was clear long before the final decision. The evidence against Ethan was too strong to deny. Every board member had seen his messages, his accounts, and his careless boasts. No excuse could save him. When the vote was finally held, the result was unanimous. Ethan was removed from all leadership roles. His name, once tied to power, became a warning of what arrogance and dishonesty could lead to. Richard stood before the board and employees during a company-wide meeting, his face hard and voice strained. For years he had shielded his son, defended him even when others raised concerns. Now, with the truth laid bare, he had no choice but to acknowledge the damage. He looked at me in front of everyone and said, "Natalie, on behalf of this company, I apologize for what you endured. You were treated unjustly, and it should never have happened." The room was silent, every ear listening. The weight of those words was heavy, not because they erased the pain, but because they admitted the wrong. After the meeting, I was called into a private discussion with the board. They explained their decision. They wanted me to return, not just to the same role, but with recognition for what had been stolen from me. They offered the bonus I had earned, along with additional compensation for the harm done. It wasn't presented as a favor, but as a necessity, a way to restore what should have been mine all along. I listened carefully, considering everything. The offer was generous, and the sincerity in their tone was different from Richard's earlier attempt to buy silence. This time it wasn't about hiding Ethan's mistakes, it was about correcting them. Still, I made one condition clear. I won't come back unless Ethan is completely gone. Not suspended, not sidelined, gone. They assured me the decision had already been finalized. Ethan no longer had any role, any influence, or any access to the company's operations. Only then did I agree. Walking out of that room, I felt a sense of control return to me, not because of the money, but because I had set the terms this time. When I finally signed the paperwork, there was a quiet satisfaction. My years of effort hadn't been erased after all. What Ethan tried to take from me had been returned, and more. He had wanted me humiliated, forgotten, discarded. Instead, he was the one left without power, while I walked back in with respect restored. The day I returned to the office, employees greeted me differently. There were nods, handshakes, even quiet smiles from people who once kept their distance. I didn't need applause. I only needed to know the truth had prevailed. And it had. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. His chair was empty, his presence erased from the place he once strutted through. That alone was worth more than any bonus check. For the first time, I felt not just vindicated but victorious. Justice, at last, was mine. When I finally received the bonus and settlement, it felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The first thing I did was clear the debts that had been hanging over me for years. Seeing those balances hit zero gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in so long. After that, my focus was on my mom. I made sure she could get the medical treatment she needed without worrying about the cost. Sitting by her side in the hospital, watching her smile because she no longer had to fear about bills, reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't escape the mess he created. His name was dragged through the mud once the truth about the shady vendor deals came out. The board cut him off, and soon after, the authorities stepped in. He had thought he was untouchable, hiding behind his father's name and money, but none of that could protect him when evidence piled against him. I didn't feel pity when I heard about his downfall. He had chosen arrogance over honesty, and those choices caught up with him. Returning to the company was strange. People looked at me differently, not with pity, but with respect. They saw I hadn't just fought for myself. I stood up against someone who thought he could walk over anyone. I wasn't interested in rubbing my victory in Ethan's face. What mattered to me was that he couldn't harm anyone else the way he tried to harm me. My coworkers who had once stayed silent now approached me, saying they were proud of how I handled everything. That meant more to me than any title. There were quiet nights when I sat at my desk and thought about how close I came to losing everything. If I hadn't mirrored those files, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, Ethan might have gotten away with it. That thought still shook me. But instead of dwelling on the betrayal, I learned to see my own strength. I had been broken down, humiliated, and underestimated, but I rose above it. That became my true victory. Looking back, I don't see this as just revenge. To me, it was about balance. Ethan thought he could play with people's lives and face no consequences. By standing up to him, I made sure he couldn't keep doing that. My win wasn't just the money or the apology. It was knowing he could never hurt another hardworking person the way he tried to hurt me. Sometimes people think revenge is about getting even, but for me, it was about justice. It was about making sure the wrongs were corrected, and that power didn't protect corruption. I carry that lesson with me every day. What tried to break me instead became the reason I grew stronger. And no matter what comes next, I know I'll never let anyone silence me again. Do you think Ethan got exactly what he deserved, or do you feel his punishment was too harsh? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.